Hi everyone, Sajid Amit here, and welcome to my review of the Audeze CRBN2. And the reason I'm smiling is that, I usually have a very different reaction, and you can tell if I'm excited about a headphone from my body language, from my facial expressions when I review it. This beautiful wooden headphone stand is very heavy, which is why I'm struggling to keep it at eye level. But yes, this is the Audeze CRBN2. As you can tell, it is a marvel aesthetic in terms of aesthetics. It's just so stunning and so beautiful. I mean, I don't even know what to say. It is really, really, really beautiful, and it sounds really nice. So I took my time reviewing e-stats because if you look at my channel, a lot of you might have joined recently or not. But if you scroll through my list of videos, you'll see that I did dabble in e-stats early on in my YouTube. My YouTube journey reflects my audiophile journey, right? I didn't start off as a content creator. Honestly, the reason I started making reviews was so that, I just could try more things. But anyway, I think, so if you look at the early part of my YouTube journey, my first 20 videos, you'll see that I reviewed stacks. And in my first 50 videos, and then I stopped because I got more into orthodynamic headphones. And the reason for this is that I'm a guy who likes SLAM. And I know this term is off-putting for people because it sounds somewhat... the term SLAM is it doesn't sound technical. It doesn't sound scientific. It doesn't really... People haven't really figured out what SLAM is. Like, people often have said that SLAM is how much sub bass a headphone has. SLAM is how much mid bass a headphone has. SLAM is a balance between sub bass and mid bass. And people have this, predominantly people seem to think that SLAM is mid bass. Others have said no, SLAM is dynamics and it's not a part of tonality, it's a part of technical performance, and you can explain that through the FR by looking at a mixture of treble and bass. So I'm not going to get into what SLAM is. It is a nebulous term, and I make no excuses for the fact that it's a nebulous term. I didn't come up with it. Audiophile jargons work because people have a way in which people in this community, in this imagined community of audiophiles, we have figured out what we all mean when we refer to words like slam or detail, right? And yes, we don't have common consensus, but we do have a fair amount of consensus. Like, I think most people would agree that Hyphen Susvara is more detailed than an HD600. Like, of course, you get people who say detail is just treble, and a Susvara and a 600 are equally detailed. And I'm not going to get into that. I'm not one of them. I do perceive detail, and most people I speak to perceive detail. And whether it's on Headfire or whether it's friends I have in real life, right? A lot of audiophile friends I have in real life agree with me on what is more detailed, what is not. So, and I think a lot of my friends in real life agree with me on what is SLAM and what is not. And also on Headfire, and also like people who watch this channel. So I haven't done a lot of e-stat reviews because I'm someone who cares about SLAM, and this is the king of SLAM right here. And in this review, you will get a lot of comparisons between the Carbon and this beautiful monstrosity, the Abyss AB12665TC, which is the king of SLAM. And then, of course, I will be drawing comparisons to, because the Audeze LCD5 is an expensive headphone. It's around $6,000. You'll be getting comparisons with the Raleigh, which is considered a kickoff headphone, that is about $9,000. And the Susvara OG, which is still well loved. It is very well loved, and a lot of people still think it's one of the best cleaners out there. If you like organic timbre, richness, I like it a lot more than the Unveiled. More on that later. Norn Audio's Victory, it's flagship cable. I will remove the cable because it'll make it more cumbersome for me to get these headphones out to you and show them off to you, because these stands are heavier than I thought. And I will also be drawing comparisons to this, not because of it holds its own or anything, but because of I want to make a few comments about timbre and how dynamic driver timbre and e-stat timbre and planar timbre and ribbon timbre will all vary, and all varies, right? Maybe what I'll do is I'll put these headphones down so I don't have to keep holding up these beautiful but heavy headphone stands. So I will just have these headphones lie down in front of me, and it'll be easier to pick up and show you guys. And I will need to show you guys these headphones as I do this review. The Carbon does have removable cables, last I checked, unless they found a way to affix themselves to the headphone. They do have removable cables. Wait, do they? No, they don't. I don't know. So I mean, they're not coming off right now. And I think the Stax X1 did, which I reviewed recently. Sorry for the faux pas. I will get back to you on whether it does. I just don't want to rip out these cables because I feel like I can sometimes do that, or maybe I overestimate my strength. But I don't want to take these out and see if they are not removable. Then I damage these, and that's not a good thing. Okay, guys, the Audeze Carbon is right here, and it is, like I said, a marvel. It's very beautiful. You see this little bit of a coloration happening here. That is exactly how it's designed. It is perhaps the most premium looking headphone I've held in my hands, along with the Raw Imanes. I think they're equally premium looking. The Raw Imanes is significantly heavier. That's not because I have less strength on my left hand or left arm. It is significantly heavier. My left biceps are tiring holding this up. This is not. Very different aesthetics. The Raw Imanes has this interesting mix of very blingy. This is real gold, then real wood, which adds to the weight, and then real leather, and they have a lot of metal parts, and then real leather on the comfort strap, and roundish ear cups as may be evident. This has a very different kind of aesthetic. This is its own thing. The leather, the wood, and the gold give it this unique look, and it looks premium. It does look like the king of headphones, if you ask me. This is sleeker. This looks like the Audeze Carbon 1, except it's got these beautiful copper accents, this copper rod, this copper sort of accent here, and there's a lot of carbon fiber here. It's a really premium materials and real leather, of course. The leather is plush. A lot of use of steel, magnesium, I think. So, and there's a plastic bit, this looks really premium, and I do think the Abyss also is a very premium looking headphone. This is also in the same price point or similar price point as the Audeze Carbon, aluminum foam or whatever it's called. It's a very different aesthetic. It's a more industrial, functional aesthetic, and I like it, and I really like this aesthetic as well. I do think it feels very premium, and if I talk about the weight comparison, this is still much lighter. So the Audeze Carbon 2 has a lot going for itself in terms of aesthetics, comfort, and the clamp is very minimal. I mean, it feels very comfortable. Ear cups are so roomy, and the moment I put them on, that's almost half the fight won by the Carbon 2 because it's so comfortable, it's so roomy, and I love really like what it looks like. So these are not factors that I underestimate the importance of: comfort, or ergonomics, and aesthetics. I like aesthetics and how premium a headphone looks. So Zvara has an iconic look, and I got this bag, and I'm considering buying it again because it pairs so well with my Riviera Lab, the XE10. But of course, Zvara, it has this unique look. This sort of cup is pretty iconic right now, and you have the gold that is visible from inside, and the use of gold is interesting, and that's one of the reasons why this is hard to dry, but more on that later. But the ear pads don't look as premium. These parts don't look as premium. They scratch up like inside of these rods, for example, right? These metal parts scratch up, but overall it doesn't look as premium. This is faux wood, right? I still like what it looks like. It just doesn't convey the same level of luxury as the Carbon 2 does. Now to talk about what the Carbon 2 sounds like. So I think what's interesting, guys, is that the Carbon 2 doesn't sound like anything else that's here. It's neutral. It's a warm neutral headphone. It's got very, 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 very good bass, and there is slam. Finally an E-stat that slams. Like, I've never heard an E-stat that slams like this. But again, I do want to disclaim that the Carbon 2 is not going to be love at first listen for most of you if it's not burnt in, and if you don't have the right amp pairing. Now let me explain. So burn-in is something that a lot of people don't buy, and that's okay. But in this hobby of ours, there are the 2-channel guys. They burn in their cables, and a lot of manufacturers of cables offer cable burn-in service. You can even get an apparatus that will burn in your cables, and I've seen that being sold, and I've laughed at it with my friends. I've made memes out of it 2-3 years ago. Until I got into Larry cables. And Larry Cable is a headphone cable manufacturer. I think they also make speaker cables. Check out Larry cables; they're wonderful. You get pure silver cables for like really, really reasonable prices. They're possibly the best sounding cables at a relatively affordable price. They have interconnects which sound amazing. They have and all that, right? I didn't plan to do a marketing spiel about Larry cables, but they are really fantastic. So do check out Larry cables. I use their interconnects and I've used their headphone cables. So the first time I got my Larry cable in for my Focal Stelia, it sounded bright, off-putting, and just goddamn wrong. You won't believe me, like a lot of you won't, and that's fine. I just hope you don't come out with pitchforks because I tire of those sorts of debates right now. People will say there's no measurable evidence that cables make a difference, and honestly, I don't know if there is or there isn't. But even if there isn't, it doesn't take away from the fact, from my experience. I know that cable made a difference after burn-in, which makes me think that we don't have the requisite science to explain it, as opposed to saying we shouldn't believe it because science has no, science isn't something that's static. Anyway, so I think the Stelia cable that I got from Larry Cable sounded just absolutely wrong when I first listened to it, and I listened to it and I couldn't anymore. So it wasn't like I got my brain to burn into that cable, or my brain to adapt and adjust to that cable. That did not happen. I just didn't like how the cable sounded, and I put it away. I was like, I've heard that Larry Cables. Actually, at that point, I hadn't even heard that Larry Cables offers a burn-in service. I just thought maybe let me try burning it in, just intuition, or whatever. And I started burning in the cable. And I burnt it in straight by playing music for 2 days. And then I listened to it, and it just sounded completely different. It went from being something that was unlistenable to something that sounded better than than Stelia did on any other cable. So there was an unmistakable burn-in effect. So yes, I do think cables make a difference. But I don't think most cables make a difference. And they're both true. Like, most cables don't make a difference, but I've heard cables make a difference. All that to say that, so when I was going through that process, that disclaimer out of the way, because if you then understand that I believe that cables make a difference and burning makes a difference. Burning in this makes a huge difference. Makes a massive difference. I don't know the science behind this, but I can give you my experiences behind this. Like, you didn't sign up for this to get the science behind this, because that's not what I do. I'm not a journalist, I'm a reviewer. And I think it's mistaken to understand, the whole reviewers to the standard of journalists, because I do this because it's fun for me, and I'm going to keep doing this as long as it's fun for me. I might slow down. I have in the past, But anyway, the long story short is the burn-in here makes a world of difference, and it really, 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 really sounded different when I first heard it compared to now. When I first heard it, it just didn't sound very well put together. It sounded a bit disjointed. The bass slam was coming through, but not as impressively as I hoped. The mid-range sounded a bit weird. It didn't sound very natural. There were treble peaks, and it just didn't sound right. I have had about, I think, 50 hours of burn-in on this, and now it sounds very different. Like, the bass sounds very impactful. And unless you're driving the Susvara off of AIC Riviera, I would say the carbon bass sounds way more impactful. It doesn't sound like any sad bass, or maybe it does. It just sounds like an impactfully sad bass. But the timbre is right in the bass, and in many ways, the bass timbre reminds me of this. So it just sounds very natural. It sounds extended. I do hear slam. I have played rock tracks with this, and I've liked it. It's not at the same level of slam as the Abyss. The Abyss is a different level, guys. But I would say it's at the same level as the this ribbon headphone. I would say the carbon slams at the same level as this, and has better bass extension. Moving on to mid-range, the carbon has it doesn't have your typical Stax mid-range. It doesn't have that super fluidity in the mid-range with like a lot of micro nuance that I think Stax offer. The Stax, I think, offers, by that I mean the 009S, the X9000, I think still offer a mid-range that I think is very unique for Stats. It's a very liquid mid-range aided by the treble. The treble combines well with the mid-range. It's the whole interplay with resonant harmonics and fundamental harmonics. And the Stax mid-range sounds very lucid and very crystalline and all that. This mid-range is still very clear, and it's still timbrally very accurate, and it feels beautiful. It sounds beautiful. I prefer female vocals on this than male vocals. And male vocals sound fine. Male vocals sound weighty and chesty, and female vocals sound very crystalline and very they just soar. I would say that this is a much better mid-range than the Abyss. Abyss has significantly better. I do EQ my Abyss mid-range. The Abyss sucks for mid-range, but I can get it to sound great in the mids by using tubes and EQ and the right source behind it. Like the Riviera Lab, the XC10 does give the Abyss very nice mids. But I think, so the mid-range is, so for me, I don't have a huge bar for mid-range. I'm not a mid-head. Although one of the reasons why I got the Susvara back was because of its mids and how it sounds on the Riviera. Also, it's bass on the Riviera, and that bass would be a deal breaker. If the bass was the same as Susvara always did, I wouldn't buy the Susvara back. But on the Riviera Lab, the XC10 Susvara has beautiful bass. However, I do want to say that the mids is still where Susvara's king, possibly rivaled by the Sennheiser 66XX, mostly because of timbre and tonality as well. But the mids here are very good. I think they're closer to the Susvara than they are to the Abyss. If I compare the mids here with the Imanis mids, I would say they're equal. The mids on the Imanis are not groundbreaking. The mids on the Imanis are beautiful with the right source chain. If you have tubes in the chain, or if you have the AIC in the chain, which is of course a hybrid amp. But the mids of the CRBN2 are on the same level as the Imanis, not the same level as Susvara in terms of naturalness and richness and all that, and organic timbre. Treble of the CRBN2 is, I think, polite. It's warm sounding. I wish there was a little more air frequencies, and maybe I'm a little spoiled by the air frequencies on the Imanis, because the Imanis has copious amounts of air. The most airy headphone that I have here, which gives us this width of stage, and this is also airy, but not as much as the Imanis. I do find this less fatiguing sometimes. But with the CRBN2, the air is very polite, which I think will work for most of you, because if you have been brought up on a staple diet of Harman, you might be someone who's sensitive to air frequencies, and this does have, a very polite presentation of air frequencies. I do perceive that there's a certain amount of energy in the lower treble and mid treble, which never becomes sharp or grating, but it just sort of makes up for the overall warmth of the headphone and gives it a little bit of incisiveness. Perhaps it contributes to the distinctness of drum hits and the clarity of female vocals and a sense of resolution as well. But overall, the treble is warm, and I like it for that. This is a very well-tuned E-stat. This is perhaps, aside from the X1, the SRX1 from Stax, which is just stunningly well-tuned, this is perhaps one of the best well-tuned E-stats, and perhaps one of the best-tuned Summit Phi headphones. A bit on the power requirement of this, like I struggled to drive this off a lot of lesser amps, and I didn't get the best performance. But if you're able to drive this on either the Blue Hawaii or the Carbon made by Mjolnir Audio, you'll get better performance. And from what I understand, this was paired with the Carbon. This was meant to be driven by the Carbon. I'll leave a link to both the Blue Hawaii website by head amp of Justin Wilson fame, and of Berger's Mjolnir Audio website. So if you want to order Carbon for this, you can, because they do pair well and it sounds exceedingly good. I just some final words on timbre, guys. I'll give you a sense of his tonality and technical performance, but timbre is basically where I think a lot of E-stats either make or break it for me. The Stax timbre really works with like Eric Clapton. It really works with Pink Floyd. It doesn't really work. The Stax timbre also works with Dire Straits. The Stax timbre doesn't work with heavy metal. It just sounds poofy in the bass, and even the growl and the attack of vocals doesn't sound very convincing on Stax headphones. Moving on to dynamic driver. These headphones tend to do everything well. So whether you play Metallica, whether you play Pink Floyd, this will hold its own. The Susvaras are again not very good for things like Metallica, right? The Susvaras are amazing for things like Pink Floyd, things like Dire Straits and all that, right? I can get away with Oasis and the occasional Pearl Jam, so some alternative would be great. This will play every rock genre well, whether it's metal, whether it's rock, whether it's alternative, whether it's industrial. And I, of course, use a bit of tubes, and I use some EQ. I think the Imanis are very good all-rounders. Of course, the TC can wreck your experience of metal and then nothing else works, outside of the TC. Surprisingly, I was able to play every genre with this. I do want to make that point. And it's not just a question of timbre, and timbre is to a degree a function of tonal performance or tonality or FR from what I understand. But this is amazing timbrely because it doesn't have the E-stat timbre of stacks. It doesn't have that airy, flowy, liquidy sort of mids and treble. It has that liquidness that you expect from stats, so you get some sense of that. It has that little bit of softness in its approach. But it still has a pretty decisive, impactful, and fulsome and distinct bass. It still has a resolution in spades. It still has a certain depth of stage that is just remarkable. So overall, I would say, guys, this is a really underappreciated headphone as of now. And I understand why, because people have come back from can jams, and some audiophiles that know, some pretty experienced audiophiles, they raved about it, and then there are audiophiles who have said, oh, I didn't like it, but maybe I didn't try it on the right chain. It is chain dependent, it is chain sensitive. Like, it sounded great on my Stax V50, but not as good as it did on higher end E-stat amps. And the difference between driving it off an high-end amp and a low-end amp was significant. Like, even the Stax flagship amps, right, revealed a lot more of its capacity and capability and ability than I think the lower-end Stax amps did. So that's it for me, guys. This is a wonderful headphone, and I do wish more people could try it off high-end sources. And also give it some time to burn in. And if you're wondering about DACs, I think this will pair well with almost any DAC. I just wouldn't advise a clinical DAC with this. Like, so I wouldn't advise a chord DAC with this. Then again, I probably don't advise a chord DAC with most things, but that's just me. But I don't advise a chord DAC with this. I don't advise anything too clinical with this. I don't advise a Delta Sigma DAC with this. I do think this will perform better with other FPGA based DACs, right? Or tube DACs or R2R DACs and what have you. So do give this a listen, but do be very, very careful about your chain because this can go from being the best and most satisfying headphone on the planet to just something that I think is not as great. So that's it for me. Sajid, I'll be signing out and see you for the next one.